It was a normal Tuesday afternoon when the school's loudspeakers came to life, interrupting chatter in the classroom. Our teacher, Mr. Harrison, had just finished up the lesson, and most of us were zoning out, waiting for the bell to signal the end of the day. But when the principal's voice came through, stern and worried, it got everyone's attention. This is a lockdown. This is not a drill. Everyone, please follow the lockdown procedure immediately. You could feel the tension through the room. We had done lockdown drills before, plenty of times in fact, but this announcement felt different. There was something in Principal Taylor's voice that made me sure something was really going on. Mr. Harrison didn't waste time. He told us to move to the back of the classroom, away from the windows, as he locked the door and turned off the lights. The familiar click of the lock seemed so much louder in the tense silence that followed. "Stay quiet, don't move," Mr. Harrison whispered as he crouched down near the door. We were sitting against the wall, huddled together in the dark. The only light came from the faint glow of phones that a few students were gripping tightly in their laps. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. My heart was pounding, and I could hear others around me breathing heavily, trying to stay calm. A few of the younger students looked like they were on the verge of tears, and even though I wanted to say something to comfort them, I was too scared to speak. There was no sound outside, no shuffling of feet or whispers in the hallway, just silence. That's when we heard it, a soft sound of footsteps outside the classroom door. At first, I thought it must be one of the security guards making sure everything was locked down, but the footsteps didn't stop. They just moved from door to door, pausing in front of each classroom like whoever was out there was listening. Mr. Harrison tensed, motioning for us to be still. We barely breathed. The sound of footsteps got closer until they were right outside our door. They stopped. I could see from the look on Mr. Harrison's face that he was as scared as the rest of us. Whoever it was stood there for what felt like an eternity, and then came the last thing we wanted, a soft tap on the door. Not a knock, a tap. Light, like the person on the other side knew we were there and was waiting for a response. No one moved. No one dared make a sound. Another tap, louder this time. Then silence again. Finally, the footsteps moved away. We all exhaled in relief, but the tension still lingered in the air. Whoever was out there hadn't been in any rush, like they knew exactly what they were doing. For what felt like an hour, we sat there in the dark, every creak of the floor or distant noise making us flinch. Then suddenly we heard it, a faint scream. It was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. It came from somewhere in the school, and that's when the reality of the situation really sank in. This wasn't a drill. Something terrible was happening. Then the loudspeakers started making a weird buzzing noise. It was subtle at first, just a quiet buzz, but it got louder, and I could see panic starting to set in. Mr. Harrison shot a worried glance at the ceiling as if he knew something was wrong, but didn't want to scare us more than we already were. That's when the door handle rattled. Whoever was out there had come back. The handle jiggled slightly, and we all froze again. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as the handle turned ever so slightly, but the door didn't open. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then we heard a voice, a whisper, so soft we almost couldn't hear it through the door. "Let me in." The whisper sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't Mr. Harrison, and it wasn't any voice I recognized. It sounded strange. The handle jiggled again, more aggressively this time. We stayed silent, every second feeling like a lifetime, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The footsteps retreated again, this time heading toward the end of the hallway. We didn't hear anything for a long time after that. No announcements, no footsteps, no more strange whispers. It was like the school had fallen into some kind of eerie, soundless void. Finally, the loudspeaker crackled to life again. "This is Principal Taylor. The lockdown is over. You may now return to your normal schedule." But he sounded scared. No one moved. We were all too scared to believe it. Mr. Harrison went to the door, peered out the small window, and finally unlocked it. But something felt wrong. There was no noise outside, no students rushing out of classrooms, no teachers talking. Mr. Harrison told us to stay put while he checked the hallway. He stepped outside and looked around for a long time before he waved us out. We left the building quickly, and as we did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. We never found out who or what had been in the school that day, but I know that lockdown wasn't a precaution. and Principal Taylor knew something. It was an ordinary Tuesday at Westbrook High. I had just finished my math class and was looking forward to lunch, but instead I found myself stuck in a bizarre situation. I had a free period and I decided to head to the old art room at the end of the hall, a place that no one really went anymore. Rumor had it that the school was haunted, and while I didn't believe it, I was curious enough to check it out. As I entered the dimly lit room, I was greeted by dust-covered easels and faded paintings that looked like they hadn't seen the light of day in years. I set my backpack down and pulled out my sketch pad, ready to immerse myself in drawing. The atmosphere was eerily calm, and I found myself lost in my art, sketching the decaying remnants of the room. Suddenly, the piercing sound of an alarm echoed through the halls, cutting through my concentration. It wasn't just any fire alarm. It had a different, more urgent tone. I froze, my heart racing. Lockdown. I remembered the drill from earlier in the year, but this felt different, more serious. I quickly looked over at the door, but it was locked. There was no way out. I felt anxiety settle in my stomach as I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. I sat down in the far corner of the room, hoping that if someone came looking, they wouldn't find me in this forgotten place. I could hear the distant sounds of chaos, the pounding footsteps of students and teachers locking down their classrooms, doors slamming shut, and muffled voices filled with confusion. I had my phone with me, but there was no signal. I couldn't call anyone or check social media for updates. All I could do was sit there, the alarm ringing relentlessly above me. The noise felt like it was drowning out my thoughts, but I focused on the sound of my breathing, counting to steady myself. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. The alarm continued to wail, and I felt increasingly isolated in the room. Then I heard something, a faint sound coming from the other side of the door. It sounded like a voice, and tapping, it was soft at first. My heart raced as I leaned closer, straining to hear. Help. Is anyone there? The voice was barely above a whisper, but it was clear enough. It was coming from outside, from the hallway. I thought about answering, but something held me back. What if it wasn't a student? What if it was someone else? My instinct screamed at me to stay quiet. The tapping grew more insistent, rhythmic, almost like a desperate plea. Please, I need help. I could hear the panic in the voice now. I felt a rush of sympathy mixed with fear. Should I respond? Should I open the door? But what if it was a trick? Just then, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. The alarm continued to blare, but the panic in the voice intensified. Suddenly, the voice outside changed. They're coming! You have to let me in. My stomach churned. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to see what was happening. I rose cautiously, moving toward the door, trying to ignore the fear. I pressed my ear against the door, listening closely. It was frantic now, filled with fear and desperation. I knew I couldn't just leave them out there. I had to open the door. I reached for the handle, my heart racing as I turned it slowly. But before I could pull it open, the alarm went silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. Panic surged through me, and I hesitated. Had they come for me? Had the danger passed? I pulled my hand away. Just then, the door swung open, and a teacher burst in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Are you okay?" they asked, looking around the room. I blinked in disbelief, looking from the teacher to the empty hallway. What about the voice? But the teacher didn't respond. Instead, they ushered me out of the room, telling me to stay close. As we left the art room, I glanced back, but there was no one there. No sign of the voice I'd heard, just the remnants of an ordinary room turned eerie by the events of the day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I didn't have the chance to dwell on it. I was swept away into the chaos of the lockdown, my mind racing with questions that might never be answered. When the lockdown was finally lifted, I learned that it had been a drill, a new protocol they were testing. But as we filed back into the classrooms, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I truly experienced in that room? And who had been calling for help? It was lunchtime, and while everyone else was outside enjoying their break, I was stuck in detention. I had gotten in trouble for goofing off in class, and my punishment was to sand old desks in the woodshop at the far end of the school. The room was dusty, filled with half-finished projects and the stale smell of sawdust. I didn't mind the quiet, though. It was better than dealing with teachers nagging me. I had just finished sanding another rough patch on one of the desks when a high-pitched alarm blared through the school. It wasn't the fire alarm, and it wasn't a drill. It was the lockdown alarm. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. Something serious was going on. Without wasting time, I shut off the lights, bolted the door, and crouched behind one of the larger desks. The woodshop wasn't the best place to hide, but I didn't have any other choice. The windows were too high and narrow to see out of, and the room was packed with tools and equipment that only added to the tension. I was terrified as I tried to listen through the chaos. Just then I heard it, a voice coming from outside the door. "Is anyone in there?" It was muffled and panicked. I realized whoever it was seemed desperate, and I didn't know if I could trust them. I didn't answer. The voice called out again, more insistently this time. "Please let me in." I could hear the fear in their tone, but I had conflicting emotions. Should I help them? Or was this a trap? Moments passed, stretching into what felt like an eternity. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the power cut off. The alarm fell silent, and I was stuck sitting in complete darkness. In the silence, the door rattled again. I strained to see in the dark. Just when I thought the worst was over, the unmistakable silhouette of a figure appeared outside the window, illuminated only by a faint emergency light down the hall. They stood there, frozen, staring right at me. The lights flickered back on. I was paralyzed, locked in place as the figure gestured toward the door. "You need to let me in. They're coming." The urgency in their voice sent chills down my spine. I stayed crouched behind the desk, my instincts screaming at me not to open the door. I looked again, but the figure was gone now, as if they had vanished into thin air. I hesitated, torn between fear and the need to act. To my surprise, the alarm turned off shortly after, and I seemed to be in the clear. The chaos had subsided. The hallways were now filled with teachers leading students back out of their classrooms. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that lingered. Whatever had happened during that lockdown, it couldn't have been all in my head. It was apparently because of a hoax call saying someone at school was going to die or something like that. I really didn't know how to feel after hearing that. What if that person could have been me? But nothing else came after the whole ordeal, so could this have been a hoax? Was it all in my head after all? I really don't know to this day, but I'm happy that nothing bad happened to me in the end.